How did it hold up?
Well, the question was, how does it hold up for us? I'll be interested in how it holds up for you guys.
Yeah.
I must say, looking at it now after all these decades, at one level, I wonder who did that. Was I even there? But at another level, I'm just filled with such. I'm so impressed by the extraordinary crew that we had in this movie. And you can tell by watching a movie like this, it doesn't happen if one person doesn't show up. Every single person on the crew is essential to getting the shot. One person doesn't show up, the smoke machine doesn't work, the dolly grip isn't smooth on the move. Imagine the things in any one of these shots. These shots are so complex. They're so layered. It's old-fashioned movie making. It's the way people made movies in the 1930s. There's almost no CGI in this movie. The only CGI was to take out like a couple of airplane contrails and everything. There's nothing added. Some subtractions. So it was a movie that William Wyler could have made. The old-fashioned way, with a lot of people. And you can imagine the depth of crew that was required for costumes, for visual effects. So my feeling is I'm just so impressed with the crew and so impressed with the cast. And looking at it now, there's no one, there's not under five, there's not a day player that I would replace. They were all perfect. And so I, as a filmmaker, feel like the luckiest guy in the world that it all came together in the summer of 1992.
What was the one shot or scene that, for you, in working together, that you wanted a certain look or to look like this, that was maybe difficult to achieve or not possible, or you had to take an alternate sort of avenue to get at something?
Well, one of the things, this was the first picture that Kees and I worked on together, and then we subsequently worked on Gods and Generals and then Copperhead. But about 1 week or so, we were just commenting on this driving over here earlier, about 1 week or so into this shoot. And I had done a number of features before. I'd worked with a lot of terrific DPs. Every shot was so daunting, and we were, as you could tell, super ambitious about every shot because we thought we're in the middle of two armies. That's more than 60,000 men. And so you couldn't just do the scenes between two people because at any given time, those two people were in the middle of thousands of people, and the thousands of people weren't sitting around. They were in the middle of activity, doing things. So there was no small scene. Everything required the greatest team of first ADs, first AD in the DGA team, because you not only had what was going on with the actors and the foreground, you had the middle ground, and you had the distant ground. So anticipating these challenges, being in the middle of this major battle, Kees and I got together weeks and weeks and weeks before we went to location. Luckily, Kees came on early. We said, we do not have to reinvent the wheel. Let's not waste our time reinventing the wheel. Let's look at what has been done before. So we went to the Warner lot, and we hired, we sat in screening rooms like this on the Warner stage. We looked at Akira Kurosawa. We looked at Sergei Bondarchuk. We looked at Waterloo. We looked at all the great movies, war movies that have been made, and said, well, how did they deal with this? And for instance, everybody in this room knows big historical pictures of Akira Kurosawa. That, again, it's the foreground, the midground, the distant ground, and the time that Kurosawa took into those gifts, the horsemen on the horizon, the flags, and you feel like you're in the middle of a medieval Japanese battle. So we informed ourselves of this. What were they doing that worked, and what were they doing that maybe didn't work? So we don't have to waste our time reinventing the wheel. And about a week into shooting, we were laying so much dolly track, we could have opened up our own railroad. And I finally thought, I thought of another extraordinary long dolly track through mid-horses and action and battle. And I said to Case, do you think guys could do this? And we had our schedule, we had 62 days, but it was demanding. And Case looked at me like he was almost insulted. He says, don't worry about how much time it'll take, just what do you want? And I knew from that moment I had the right guy. Because not only did he never say, no, we can't do that or it'll take too long, he was inspired. The more you threw at this guy, the more happier he was, and his crew.
What logistically, or because of terrain or other considerations, was the most difficult for you to deal with?
I think the most difficult thing was for me, because it takes place 60 days, and you're going through rain, shine, sunny, always try to keep a certain amount of consistency between rain and shine and overcast. And I thought that was always a big challenge. Every morning I looked at the sky and I thought, okay, continue with the scene we did yesterday, but now the sun is up. How we're going to deal with that? But there's certain tricks you can do, and it's not perfect at times, of course, because the sun comes out. But if you then stage it in backlight, it's somewhat acceptable. And obviously we had the whole smoke at times, to disguise it in filters. But it's funny when I look back at it now, I'm going like, my God, what an exercise in trying to keep it continuously. I mean, and then also I don't want to be anal about that. I mean, when Kubrick did Barry Lyndon, they shot it in Scotland. And in Scotland, the weather changes every 10 minutes. Yeah. And Johnny Alcott was his DP, and John said to Kubrick, what do you want me to do? He said, just do it, fix it. So Alcott shot that movie where the sun comes out during the overcast. He just adjusts the iris, and he does all these things where, if you think about it, he said that's never going to work. When you look at Barry Lyndon, it's working really beautifully, right? And that was in my mind always when I was doing this film. I remember saying, well, Johnny did it. Why can't I do it? Why do I have to say, oh no, we can't shoot right now? Because you can't do that in these movies. I mean, people are waiting to go, and when you got to shoot, you got to shoot. You can't just say we got to wait for the sun to come out.
We never waited for the weather, but we couldn't. And we had a very tight schedule. I mean, those in the business, when I tell you this movie cost $15.5 million, I know you wouldn't believe me, even in 1992. And again, we were able to deliver that again, getting back to the crew we had. Because I think those in the motion picture business, every now and then you know that you're on a movie that you'll never forget. Everybody knows it. Whether you're the grip, wherever you are in the crew. You can make up people. Because people work all the time, they work on good, bad, and different, but there was a feeling on the set of, whoa, this is the Battle of Gettysburg. It's our heritage as Americans. It's world heritage. It's one of those battles that people know in foreign countries. It's part of the human story, so it's working on a lot of different levels. And it's a Pulitzer Prize winning book. And everybody in the crew knew this, the cast knew it, and so the sense of we have to rise to the occasion was very, very high. And as a result, we knew the schedule, and as Kay said, we couldn't slow down, you couldn't stop. The sky was what the sky was. And we had, on that schedule, we had only 5 days of rain cover. It's 5 days. The interior headquarters, the interior tents. It's basically an exterior movie. So we're at the mercy of the elements. The summer of 1992 in Pennsylvania, it could rain, it could thunderstorm, anything could happen. And that summer, very hot, very humid, all those people in wool uniforms, it was brutal. And it rained for 5 days. We used up all our rain cover. It didn't rain for 6, so the gods were looking down on us favorably. And we had allotted 6 days for Pickett's charge. We had storyboarded that we had 6 days, and we thought, well, it could rain. Now that week we had 5,500 reenactors. in a camp, which they had meals and they had a place to water their horses and latrines and the whole business. But at the end of that week, thousands would leave because they had their vacations scheduled long in advance. We had 6 days to shoot it, so we prioritized the shots. Day one, it might rain, may not have a thunderstorm, we'll get washed out. Well, if we only have 1 day to shoot Pickett's Charge, they're going to be gone. This is not CGI time, this is real people. So the first day was the absolutely essential shots to tell the story. The second day, the next essential shots. The third day, the shots we'd like to have. The fourth day, we're lucky, and the fifth day, we really lucked out. Well, guess what? It didn't rain all that. That's why the Pickett's Charge scene is like a movie within a movie. We did everything we wanted to do. As one of the snarky critics said, when the movie came out, Pickett's Charge in the movie lasted longer than it did in history.
So there were a lot of your background. Were any of those actual like reenactment groups, actors from across the country?
We recruited short story. I'm trying to keep it as short as possible. A lot of people know that from start to finish, when I read the book and optioned the book in '78 to the time it was in theaters, in '93 was 15 years. So during that time, the early years, all the studios I've met with, and I met with everyone, and they all told me, oh, we love you, Ron, but we're not doing your project. Anybody in the business has heard that over and over again. And I thought the only way to do it in production was Eastern Europe, like De Laurentiis did, Waterloo, rent an army in Poland, or rent an army in Hungary, or in those days, Ukraine, Soviet Union. And I went there. I did those surveys and met with people in those countries. But a couple of things happened in the late 80s. One was the Soviet Union fell apart. There was no more rent an army in Eastern Europe. And the second thing that happened was the reenacting movement was growing and growing and growing. And the first movie that used them to any significance about 2 years, 2.5 years, maybe 3 years in terms of production before us was Glory. Glory went to a reenactment that was already scheduled, and they filmed some of those long shots very cleverly. And that's the beginning of the movie, Glory. By the time we came around, we thought, we didn't want to just be on the outside of reenactment because we can't control anything. We want to recruit those people. So we organized a recruitment system to bring them in by companies. So this movie, Gettysburg, was done by companies. So a whole unit would come from Arkansas. Our artillery unit would come with their own artillery from Texas. A cavalry unit would come with their own horses from North Carolina. They came. The great thing about that is they came as units and stayed and left as units, and they were all friends. The downside is you couldn't tell anybody to go away. So the guys who were like over 50 and 350 pounds didn't look like anybody in the Civil War. But we couldn't tell them to leave, so we just moved them back. So the AD team would get as far away as possible to the rear and bring the younger guys up. Now, when we did Gods and Generals a decade later, we said, let's do it a different way. We need to be in control of it. So instead of doing it by company, and the companies were all listed as the end crawl goes on. They came from all over America. And it wasn't just the Pickett's Charge week where we had the 5,500. The whole show we had reenactors, Yankees and Confederates. And then on Gods and Generals, we recruited them. So we hired people to recruit them one at a time. They had to submit a picture and a resume. They could belong to different companies. And so in that sense, we have many more younger, leaner looking guys in Gods and Generals. It's one of the things we learned when we made this movie.
And going through that process, did you have a lot of people that you didn't use or turn down for one reason or another?
Well, yeah, the guys who were obviously older, they wouldn't have been on the battlefield, or way overweight, and I didn't have to make those reject calls. So that must have been hard on people who wanted to participate. But yeah, I'd say the folks that were involved with that from the reenactment movement did it in a very sympathetic way as they could. But I'd say a few hundred people would say, thanks a lot, we can't use you.
There must have been a whole lot of people in all those reenactment companies. How big are some of those groups, do you know?
Oh, I have a feeling that it hit its peak sometime in the last decade. first decade of the turn of the millennium. It's still very active, all sorts of reenactors. The War of 1812, colonial period, World War II. Reenactment groups exist all over North America, but also in other countries.
Okay, so what about like, because you were obviously shooting on film, there was no digital really at the time. How did you get your dailies processed? Was there a place locally that you had it, or was it all shipped out and done here and then shipped
Yeah,
back?
I think, if I remember, the next day was at dailies, right? And those were film dailies. They printed on film, and then we would have a projection room in Gettysburg that we would go and see it, yeah.
And were they processed there? or-
Yeah, no, it was processed in LA.
Here.
Go to camp,
Oh,
shipped out. So there might have been a day in between what we saw.
Yeah, I think we didn't see the next day, because the time travel between getting from Pennsylvania to here to get developed in print and synced for the sync dailies. It was 2 days later we saw dailies. Now the executives in Hollywood were seeing it, I think, the next day, and they were getting the feedback. But we saw it 2 days later. And I guess I'm remembering some days after these 12, 14-hour days of being on your feet, who wanted to sit in a screening room, at the end of the day? You just wanted to collapse. So I don't remember seeing dailies on a regular basis. We did now and then, especially in this beginning, when we wanted to make sure we were getting the look right and the style right.
Did you ever see anything that you thought maybe you had to reshoot? I mean, that would have been pretty big job, but anything that you didn't like when you did see it?
I don't recall anything we had to reshoot, except when we didn't get it the first time. So it wasn't a reshoot in this traditional sense when you see things, we need to go back. Well, we did have one instance, which I've talked about in other interviews before, some people may have heard this, where we shot the scene with Jeff Daniels as Chamberlain, the speech he gives to the second Maine mutineers. And this movie, as fans of the movie knows, has cinematic soliloquies, where one actor will talk for 3.5, 4 pages of dialogue. And I can tell you, the script was going around, every studio said no. And what I always heard was, Ron, you've got a script with one person talking for 3 to 4 pages. This can't be. And you know what? Where on the tablets from Mount Sinai was that written down? But they said it with great conviction. And I remember and I would not. You get nowhere arguing with studio executives. You're wasting your time. But one meeting I remember, I said, "How many pages long is Meryl Streep talking at the end of that scene in Sophie's Choice? Did you look at the script? Of course they didn't. She's talking for like 7 minutes. You're not aware of the pages or the paragraphs. You can't take your eyes off her." So all this nonsense we filmmakers have to listen to, and Gettysburg has a number of these speeches which come out of the novel. And I think that I cut them down and make them short. It was like, do you have the attention span, you guys, to listen to a speech? If you believe it, if it's real, if it's delivered with the artistry of a Jeff Daniels or a Richard Jordan, or of course, you're emotionally connected. You're not aware of the paragraphs or the words on the page. And in that scene, the important scene, they're all important scenes, but the scene where it's all on him in a close-up, we did a slow down move in, no cuts, except when we're looking at people listening. We shot at the end of the day, low light, backlit. Mr. Backlit guy here. And when you're working with Jeff Daniels or Tom Berenger or Martin Sheen or Sam Elliott, Richard Jordan, there's no good or bad. There's no right or wrong. The actors in this film, they didn't get any better in the summer of 1992. There were other great actors doing other things, but this is a creme de la creme. So you're working here. So, and as a director, like all directors, I don't want good enough. I want the very, very best they can do. I want it forever. And they know it and they love it. And they know it when they don't want, nice job. No, they don't want that. They've been around the block. They've worked with great directors. They want the truth. When we got to the end, the light was too low. I said, Jeff, and I talked intimately, not in front of the whole crew, not a performance. I said, Jeff, we didn't get it. Not there. And then we had a viewing. He understood. He wasn't offended, he wasn't insulted, he understood. He agreed. I told the producers of the studio we needed to do the same scene again. They said, well, wait till we see the dailies. I said, I don't need to see the dailies. I was there. We need to go again. Imagine how important the scene is in the movie. Well, we got a lot of pushback. I won't go through the details. Finally, through a lot of pushback, they agreed to add a half a day to the schedule. So we'll make it up. But there was a lot of pressure, like all filmmakers, to not lose a half a day. We went back the next day. We waited for the light to match. To answer your earlier question, you wouldn't cut otherwise. And on the first take, on the next day, Jeff Daniels nailed it, and that's what's in the movie. Now, why would we want less than that? So in a sense, it was a reshoot, but done immediately because we thought we didn't get it first time.
It helped a lot that he agreed with you. He knew that it wasn't right there. Was Ted Turner directly involved with the production at any level? Because I know Turner Pictures.
Yes. I hadn't met, the first screenplay I had, I acquired the rights in '78. The first screenplay I had, it wasn't quick and easy for me to get the screenplay. I struggled over it for many months. And the first screenplay I had was in 1980. And Richard Jordan was already a very good friend in those days, and he gave me feedback. And I needed to hear it. So Richard and another friend, Hal Holbrook, we got together about 20 actors, just volunteered their time. We went backstage at the Mark Taper Forum on a quiet night. We put a buffet of sandwiches out there. It got it at 6 p.m. and we read this script until midnight. When they were done reading, and the last thing is another actor was just reading the stage directions. The last thing you hear in the stage directions is the Chamberlain brothers embrace. There was a pause, there was a quiet moment, and then this group of real pros, Dana Elcar, Peter Donat, actors we know that the LA stage and movie screen. They broke into a spontaneous, heartfelt, sustained applause. And I knew in that moment we were going to make the movie. That was 1980. We didn't film it until 1992. But they got it. And that, in that moment, I didn't know how long it was going to take, but it was like the endorsement to continue. What was your original question?
It was Ted.
Okay, so Ted. So that's what I had. That's right. So that's what I had the screenplay. I felt I could share with. Was trying to share with other people. And Hal Holbrook, who was at that reading. That's why I tell this story. He said, "I'll get it to Ted," because he was doing the narration for a series that Ted Turner was producing at TBS before TNT, documentary series. And he got it to Ted. And I got a call a week or two later from Robert Wussler, who was the head of his company. And Wussler said Ted loved it. He just loved it, but he's not in a position to do dramatic television. Well, 12 years would go by before he was in that position when he had a company that could do it. And later on, I had met Ken Burns about 2 or 3 months before his series came out. He showed us a clip at the Civil War Roundtable in Manhattan where I was living. And the clip he showed us was a scene with Chamberlain. And we met. He said, I was inspired to do the Civil War series by Michael Sharra's book from Chamberlain. Chamberlain wasn't known to the public. It was known to historians. But it was first Ken Burns and then our film that catapulted him into the pantheon of great Civil War heroes. And then a few months later, the Civil War series opened up. It was a phenomenon. And suddenly, all these places that had no interest in the Civil War thought, oh, there's an audience for the Civil War. And Ken called me and he said, I'm going to get the Producers Guild Award for the Civil War series. Why don't you come? Because it's going to be presented to me by Ted Turner. So I showed up at that evening here in LA. I wasn't living in New York at the time. Ted Turner spent 5 minutes praising Ken Burns and saying, why doesn't anybody make a movie on the Civil War? He was doing my pitch, in other words. I had nothing more to say. And at the end of the event, Ken introduced me, and like, oh yeah, Ron, I remember reading that a decade ago. And I said, and Ken said, well, it's available, you should do it. And Ted said to me, have your people call my people. And after, at that point, 12 years, I was standing in the right place at the right time. Welcome to Hollywood.
Let's open up to the audience if anybody has any questions. You're in red.
There's a lot of monuments in Gettysburg. Was there any issue shooting the long shots and not getting some of the monuments on the Civil War during the movie?
Yeah, not only are there monuments at the Battle of Gettysburg, but at that time when we were filming, there was a humongous tower, observation tower. So basically, there were 3 ways to avoid all these monuments and towers. One was don't shoot in that direction. 2, put a tree or a bush from the greens crew between you and the camera lens. Or 3, put an actor or a horse between you and the camera lens. And we managed to shoot a lot around. Now, when you get up to the angle, which is the climactic moment in Pickett's charge, the hand-to-hand fighting, when Armistead arrives at what's called the bloody angle, that is in the middle of what is now monuments on Cemetery Ridge. So that, for 2 reasons, we couldn't film there because there's no way to avoid the monuments. The other reason was when we got permission to shoot in the national park, I'd say 60 to 65% of the movie is shot within the bounds of the national park. The others shot nearby. And the reason we shot some of it elsewhere is because we were not permitted to do any combat where people were shooting at each other in the same shot. We were allowed to have people shoot this way, or shoot that way, but if in the same shot, so people, they considered it too dangerous. And it is dangerous, because even muskets with blanks have cartridges that can blind somebody. I can tell you, this was the most hazardous set imaginable. Real bayonets, real muskets, real cannons, powder, and again, I don't want to harp on this, but great DGA team. And the first thing we said every morning, safety, safety, safety. There's no shot, there's no scene, there's no movie worth putting a human being or an animal at risk, and we're not going to do it. And no horse was injured on this movie, and I'm proud of that because I love horses. And so is the crew proud of that. So we proceeded that every setup is very dangerous. And we had, even though we had that attitude, we had a couple of close calls. A couple with cannons that were delayed firing and that kind of thing. And you saw the shots. We were going across muskets shooting and going to cannon shooting and fiberglass and reinforced fiberglass. And Kees's crew had covered with protective devices and shields. So basically, all that stuff is off the park. And all the places where there's a lot of monuments, we just didn't film it. Now, a few years after we filmed, they tore down that monstrosity of an observation tower. That's long gone.
Ron, you had said that this is old-fashioned movie making, and that seemed on point as an observer. And you'd have to go back to All Quiet on the Western Front to get that feeling where you had those soliloquies, where you had Kilrain and the Jeff Daniels character talking about the why behind it. And I wondered where that material came from. Was it from the book? Was it from your screenplay? Was it from letters where they were talking about why fight the war and they were philosophizing? Because as a former military guy, that happens all the time, but it's never in films. And I was so grateful to see soldiers portrayed as thoughtful people and wondering what they're doing and espousing some of their philosophies. So I wondered where that came from, those speeches.
Well, it's, the why question obviously is very important to me. Why are people fighting? Now, eventually there was conscription in both the Federal Army and the Confederate Army, but not yet. I could be wrong. I think I'm correct on this. I think by the summer of 1863 there were still volunteer armies. So you're talking about a very highly motivated soldier. So I felt it was very important. Chamberlain is the one who articulates why the Yankees are fighting. He becomes that voice. And various Confederates do, sometimes in a humorous way, like Kemper, Michael Shara uses Fremantle, the British observer, and they're all real people, except for Kilrain. Kilrain is a fictional character, but with the exception of Kilrain, they're all real characters. And Fremantle came in with a member of the Coldstream Guards, and Michael Shara in the novel uses him as the foil so that Confederates can talk about why they're fighting, because he keeps asking them questions. Why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? And Longstreet tells him. And then there's the intimate scene between Longstreet and Armistead at night, when they say, why are we fighting? And then there's a very intimate moment between them. And Armistead expresses, well, there's the cause, their cause. And then Longstreet says, I just put my head down and fight. So, and that represents this variation of motivation of why people were fighting. And in the Civil War, another thing that's that we understand, those of us who studied it, is these volunteer armies, people who arrived together, brothers, cousins, people in the same town. And we don't allow that in the American military anymore since World War II, when brothers, same people in the same family, died in the Pacific theater or died in the European theater. You can't go back to somebody's home and say, Mom, you just lost both your sons this afternoon.
Brothers, I think, right? The Sullivan
Yeah, Sullivan brothers. So, but in the Civil War, they all fought together. So 90%, give or take, of the text, the dialogue in this movie is Michael Shara's. 10% is mine. I think I wanted to make more of the Armistead character because he's a great foil again for the scene between Fremantle and Armistead. When Armistead tells him who's here, this is the grandson of this president, this is the grandson of Patrick Henry. Again, to have the feeling of Virginia being a family, of everybody knowing everybody. That's the scene that I wrote that's not in the book. And there's 3 or 4 scenes like that. And another part of my motivation was Richard was an old friend. I met him in 1971 in the south of Spain when I was Charlton Heston's personal assistant getting him his coffee. And Richard was working on a Western, and we met at the hotel in the evening where we became great friends in the summer of '71.
Were you getting coffee on El Cid or something?
The movie was Antony and Cleopatra, which Chuck played Antony, and he also directed it. So it was a great experience for me right out of film school.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Anything else? Right in the back?
This is his last movie. I was wondering if you could elaborate a little more on Richard Jordan and his performance and working with him in this, and then also the whole monologue he had in the tent. I thought was fantastic. So I was wondering if you could just elaborate on him and your relationship with him and his performance in the movie.
I'm not exaggerating. There isn't a day since he left us in the summer of '93 that I haven't thought of Richard. I think of him like I think of my parents. He never leaves me. He was a dear, dear friend. He was a Renaissance man. He was a great intellect. He was deeply and widely read. He loved the theater. He came from the theater before he did cinema. As I said, I met him the summer of '71 in Almeria when I was there with the mother of my children, when she was already pregnant with my daughter. And we became great friends. And when that was '71, so by '78, when I bought the option for Killer Angels, he knew the book, and every time I had a draft, and I had many drafts before the reading I told you about, he would read it. And I imagine there's a lot of people in the film industry in this audience tonight, and we all know that when we have a draft, we should give it to our friends, and we expect our friends to be brutally honest with us. And we do the same. We read the scripts that our friends send us, and this was the relationship that we had. And meanwhile, he was working in between making a lot of memorable movies. He did working at the Joe Papp's Shakespeare Company. We just, he was a great buddy. And so I tailor-made this role for him. So there's more than what's in the book. And he was there the whole summer of '92. We finally worked together after years of being friends. And that's the following summer, summer of '93, we were in post-production. He called me over to his house, he lived in Carbon Canyon, and he said I'd been diagnosed with terminal brain tumor. And he was gone 2 months later. Had surgery, I think he died right after the surgery. He did see, I showed him an assembly with the temp tracks before we hadn't done the score yet, Randy Edelman's magnificent score. But he saw the whole movie start to finish at my house. So he did see that, and he was so pleased, so pleased. He was young, he was 56, I think, when he died.
Question right here?
I've watched this film since I was 7 or 8 years old. I can't remember exactly when. And since then, I've gone on to both study film and also history. What I would love to ask you about is like when you were writing the script and building the characters around both the Shara's novel and also your own work, how much time did you go into both looking, sort of like what you were saying about looking at the texts that were written by like Chamberlain after the war or during the war, as well as like one of my most favorite figures of the war was Longstreet, and specifically the period after the war when he was rehabilitating his record in the face of the lost cause and in the face of like how other people were discussing the whole story of Gettysburg. One of my favorite lines, just to go back to that earlier scenes between him and Armistead, was when he said he doesn't think about the cause as much anymore. And I think, yeah, like just in terms of filmmaking, like I think that subtext is so crucial, and I think you achieved that there. And in other moments besides, so I'm just curious about like building that into the writing and the specificity of like certain moments like that.
Well, thank you for the question, and I think I'm glad you brought up subtext, because I'm a great believer that the text only ever works when you feel the subtext. You can't have one without the other. It loses, it collapses. Because you have a sense of what they're thinking before they say it or after they say it. And also the relationship. All movies, but this kind of narrative movie anyway, is ultimately about relationships. Take off their costumes and their wigs and their hairpieces. It's about a human story between people who loved each other. So what we see here, what Michael Shara was able to achieve in his novel, I think is one of the strengths of this novel. There's a French term called l'envers du médaille. L'envers, the other side of the medal. We see the shiny side. What is the shiny side? Brotherly love. And this, all over this movie, the Yankee characters love each other. The Confederate characters love each other. And in the case of Armistead and Hancock, two old friends, they love each other. And that scene when Armistead feels he's dying and he hears that Hancock's been wounded, that's just too much for him to bear. He says, not all of us, not both of us. L'envers du médaille, the other side of that, is fratricide. Look at the massacre we just witnessed. 20,000 casualties in one day. Over 3 days. I got that wrong, 60,000 casualties over 3 days. You all know it. You're obviously, to me, somewhat a living embodiment of how deeply the Civil War is known by people who care to read about it. So it was painful. Again, it was painful to shoot this stuff. But Kees will tell you too. You spend days and days filming people shooting at each other. Yeah, we know it's not real, but it is real. Emotionally, it's real, and it really happened. And suddenly you're back. The whole point of this is to take us back to the 1860s. We can't bring them here. That's ridiculous. Which is why, in going back there, we have to go to their world. Yeah, we can sit in judgment of this group or that group or this person or that person, and we do sit in judgment because we're in a different place. That's like 150 years from now. That's how far we are. 150 years from now, people will look at our generation and say, "Why did you ruin the planet? Why did you leave us this wasteland? You don't think we're going to be judged?" Oh, off the charts. So we can look at this generation and say, what were they thinking? So these two sides of the human condition, and it's right in the title of the book, The Killer Angels, and it's in the scene between Kilrain and Chamberlain, when they're talking about the quote, "What a piece of work is man, how noble in reason," etc. This theme runs through it. Now, getting back to the research, yes, I read all I could get my hands on. I ended up having 12 years. So all this, the diaries and the letters, the stuff that Michael Shara had consulted before he wrote the novel, I consulted. And not only did I consult it, and it influenced the screenplay, but I think without exception, every single actor showed up who they knew weeks, in some cases months ahead of time, what role they were going to play. By the time they got to the set, they had read the regimental histories or the biographies of their characters. Everybody wanted to be ready for it.
Anybody else?
I've watched the movie many times, and today was the first time I noticed this, that when Kilrain is complaining about his arm wound, he mentions, well, it's not as bad, paraphrase, not as bad as if it affected your everyday functions. And he's talking to Chamberlain, who later had a wound that affected his everyday functions. Is that something you put in?
No, that is from the book. Whether, it's an interesting question. I never asked Michael if he was doing a kind of foreshadowing of what would happen. In the book, his son would write about the end of the war, the last full measure, many years later after he was no longer with us. Michael Shara died in '88, so he didn't live to see the movie being there. It was an interesting question. I've never heard that brought up before.
I had a two-part question, because I know that there was a point where it's going to be a miniseries on television, and then there's a decision to make it a feature film. Just curious what would have been lost or what was gained by those decisions, and whether or not there's been a discussion on a 4K restoration.
Well, I had written, as I said earlier, a screenplay for a big movie, and that's when I was running around town trying to get finance for decade plus. And then when finally Turner said, "Let's do it," he had a TV company called TNT. So they were going to do it as a miniseries. So the screenplay had to be somewhat looked at. At the end of the day, even though we went through a kind of a process, the screenplay was exactly the same as the one that I wanted to make into a movie. Nothing was subtracted or taken away. And we thought, well, it'll be, well, you just saw you just saw how long it is. And it's actually longer because the director's cut, which is available online on DVD, is 20 minutes longer than this, even if you can believe it. And that's everything we shot. And then, so the plan, probably one of the reasons it was only budgeted at $15.5 million, because if people thought we were going to make a movie up front, we probably would, first of all, would have shot it wide screen, we would have shot it 2.35 CinemaScope. Luckily, we shot this in 1.85. So that was something we didn't do what we would have done had we known we were making a feature. We would have probably had a bigger budget and a longer schedule, but we had the schedule and the budget we had. We were only a week in, when Ted Turner saw the dailies and he said, "This is too big for television. I'm going to release it as a movie." So we knew a week in or maximum thing that's in this, we're making a movie. But nothing else other than the length of the schedule, the size of the budget, or the fact that we would have shot in 235. Nothing else was changed. And we just proceeded. Now, everybody knew at that point, we're going to have a movie that's going to need an intermission. But Ted didn't care. It relates to your earlier question about Ted Turner. Ted was very involved. And I got to know him in this process. Before that, I just didn't know him. And it was very encouraging. He and Jane Fonda were together at the time. And they came to the set when we did Pickett's Charge. And they went up in one of the grip lifts. I wasn't with them. I was up on the ground directing. But I heard afterwards that Jane Fonda was just in tears. She was overwhelmed emotionally by watching. They were there for one day. I think it was the day we had the 5,000 guys. And of course, he stayed for a second day, and you saw the scene where he gets shot. And the night before that scene, we had dinner with a couple of the actors. And Case, I think you were there. And I said, "Now, Ted, how do you want me to shoot the scene? I can shoot it 2 ways. I can put the camera real low and shoot you against the sky and 20 guys, and it'll take us maximum 45 minutes to get the shot. Or I can lift the camera up and see that you got 3,000 guys, and that's more explosives and smoke, and that's not 45 minutes. It could be an hour and a half for the same shot. And I didn't want to spend his money irresponsibly. And he said, "I want to do it the big way." And that's what you saw. And the first take, we practiced it. Everybody behind him, and explosions, a lot of prep, special effects. In the first take, he had the squib, and the squib goes off, and then he goes, "Oh, God, so I said, you know."
But you can't avoid the story of Ted, that after 3 dinners with you, he said, "I'm not going to have dinner with you anymore if it turns $1 million.
He said that too. A candid speaker, as we all know. God bless him. He's not that well now. He's not that well, but he's hanging in. So the second take, he got. That's when it's in the movie, and that was it. And I said after the test, I said, "Thank God we got the second take." I had this vision of spending half the day doing this take over and over and over again. And I said, "Cut print," and he said, "Call me 2-take Ted." But he was so supportive through the whole picture. And then during the process of filming, he inquired who would distribute the movie. And when Ted Turner, being a businessman, find out the pound of flesh that studios take to distribute your movie, he said, "F this." And he went out and bought a studio. And so he bought New Line Cinema, and New Line Cinema released the movie.
What spurred to do the 70mm blow up? Was it the soundtrack?
It was Ted Turner again, because Ted Turner, when we were finishing the movie, and we were going to release it in the regular 35mm release, and he also the process. He saw all the dailies, and then he saw the first cut, and he saw the second cut, and at some point when we had, we were having this movie that was 4 hours, and, well, including what turned out to be the director's cut, it was 4 hours and 40 minutes, and I would, like any director, I'm trying to cut it down. I don't want it to be longer. I don't want it to be a frame longer than it needs to be. I don't need anybody to tell me that. I'm trying to get it, you know. And I got a call from an executive. I won't mention his name. And if you're in the business long enough, an executive is going to be screaming at you. As loud as they can scream with their tonsils jumping out of their throat. And one of these executives at TNT was screaming at me that I'm not being responsible, and there's no way they're going to release a movie under 4 hours, and get it down to under 4 hours, or else.
I wondered when this story was coming.
So I'm working. I got the message. You know, it's Hollywood. I'm not going to be arrogant, etc. Expletive deleted. I'm trying to go back with Corky. We're trying to get it under 4 hours. The next day, the phone rings. It's Ted Turner from Atlanta. He says, "What's this I hear about you trying to get the movie under 4 hours?" I go, "Well, your executive called me and he was emphatic. He said, "You know how long Cleopatra is?" I said, "No, I don't know." He says, "Cleopatra is 4 hours and 4 minutes, and my damn movie's not going to be shorter than that." No problem, Ted. And I never heard from that other executive again.
Did he have his job after that?
He did for a long time. He's had a big career. No need to mention
Yeah,
it.
no. Anybody else? Here in the back?
The soundtrack is so good. It's so good. It's truly it's a character in the movie. And I wonder if, the music, did that come to you from him in drafts where you might have to say, "Oh, it's okay, Randy, but maybe more dramatic," or did he knock it out of the park?
Well, I think we know after the fact, he definitely knocked it out of the park. I mean, in my view,
Well, I mean, the first, like, right
Y-
out
y-
of the gate.
yes, I will answer that in more detail, but we're now 32 plus years after the release of this movie, and I'm in my late 70s, and so I grew up listening to Miklos Rosa, Alex North, Newman, the great scores from Hollywood, Korngold, all these East Europeans and Austrians and Germans who came over in the 30s and 40s and brought the Middle European culture of music to Hollywood. These incredible scores. And Randy wrote this obviously in that tradition. It's that kind of music where music plays the interior life. Now, we're in a world now where, yes, some movies still have melodic scores like Randy's. Most don't. Most have soundscapes today, which are very effective. And some movies have minimal music, almost none. And I had the same choices at the time. You could go with a melodic orchestral score. You could go with soundscapes or no music. And all those choices would have been effective in any filmmaker making the same script. I obviously opted for the melodic score. Why? Because what Randy's giving us, or what any composer's giving you, is the inner life. He's not repeating what you're seeing. He's giving you back to the subtext. Your question. It's the subtext. And it's a very fragile thing. We talked about reshooting. This doesn't require reshooting, this requires re-editing. I can tell you, Corky and Case was involved, even invited to participate in post-production to see, get his advice, because Case is a total filmmaker. And should we use less music here? And we go back and forth, weeks. Take the music out, put the music back. It's agonizing because the music is so powerful. It can push something too far, too late, too this. Agonized over it. I still, years later, maybe I could go less there. It never ends. I had a dear friend, a filmmaker, Yuri Weiss, who died 25 years ago, a great Czech filmmaker. He won the Golden Bear at Berlin. Or where do you get the Golden Bear? Venice? I forget where you get the Golden Bear. One of those film festivals, he won the award for Best Picture. And he said, as he was watching it, before he got the award, he said the scissors were moving in his pocket. And of course, those are the days when you're still cutting film. And I feel the same way. You're looking at an imperfect creation. And until your dying day, you say, should have, would have, could have, but. It's your child is born, and you love your child. And it is what it is. So in Randy's case, we decided to opt for this kind of music, and those are the composers we considered. And we sat down and had the same conversation years later with John Frizzell on Gods and Generals, and years later with Laurent Hikem on Copperhead. I always opted for the melody, the orchestral sound. And it's a similar conversation. So all three movies in the 1860s. So I told Randy, what were they listening to? Hymns, folk music. And if they lived in a big city, they heard Beethoven or Haydn, but very few. No digital music. So mostly hymn music, church music, and folk music, fiddles. And so the chord structure, those who are musicians here, know that the entire chord structure of Randy's score, it's derivative of the 19th century hymnal, which is why it's got this kind of sacred feeling undertow to it. And then we hired him after shooting, but he had many months. Now he likes to tell a different story. He's a good buddy. I invited him, but he's not in town. He likes to tell the story where he got the score 5 minutes before the film was released. Don't believe him. He had a lot of time. Come on, this is a 5-hour movie. It's got 3.5 hours of music. That's like 3 symphonies. So he had time, and then I listened to it at his house in Beverly Hills on piano first. Because if somebody's going in the wrong direction, you want to come back. And then later with synth. So I knew where he was going. And also we gave him the temp track, we give composers a temp track, and they try to, this is where we want music. And then I didn't hear it, like nobody heard it until we went and recorded the score. But it was a process. And he was always in the groove, and he exceeded our expectations. I think he wrote one of the all-time great scores. Probably is a bigger fan than me is Ted Turner. In the years after the movie opened, Ted would tell me he played the CD in the car like all the time. He was listening to the Gettysburg score.
It's funny that, most artists, creators, people that I know, even Stephen King said that, there's a certain time when that book's gotta go to publish. You're never finished with it, but this is where it's at, and because you'll be writing and editing and changing. You'd still be working on it today, because you'd never be happy with it. That seems to be the sort of the oversense I get from most people who create like that. Right here?
I was curious about the choices as to put, where to put each song, where to put the music. Like the singing where Armistead and Longstreet are speaking in the tent, or the guitar melody near the end where the Chamberlain brothers hug, and it's just like, were songs created with certain scenes in mind and where to put them?
Well, there are 3 kinds of music in the movie. There's what Randy did, the score, which is the subtext, the inner life, what's going on in their hearts. Which is the poignancy of the relationships and the grandeur. We have to be careful with that one, because you can overdo the grandeur. The intention here is not to glorify people killing each other, so you got to be real careful. And the other one is singing. That's like the Kathleen Mavourneen, the tenor that he hears off stage. And that's a relation, as he says in the scene. The last time he heard that was in California when they were saying all goodbye to each other. The men, they were all wearing blue at the beginning of the war, but some were going back north and some were going down south. They knew they were going to fight each other. They didn't think the war was going to go on for 4+ years. They all thought it was going to be over in a week. So that song is very poignant. It was a popular song at the time. The other, then we hear the fiddle playing Dixie a couple of times. That's part of the score, woven into the score. And then the other on-camera music is the fifes and drums. Both the Confederate playing the Bonnie Blue Flag when Lee has one of the early scenes was Longstreet. The Bonnie Blue Flag was more popular in the Confederate Army than Dixie was at the time. And then we hear fifes and drums that were appropriate to the period and all that stuff. As we know, those who know how to movie making, has to be pre-recorded. All of it's pre-recorded, and then played back on the set so that the drummers and everybody can mimic what they're hearing. It's not recorded on the day. So every time you see that, and David Franker was our music director. So all that stuff that is not score is done ahead of time, and then to play back, the way that musicals are usually done, at least until Les Mis. Les Mis broke that tradition. But all other musicals, we pre-recorded, then done to playback.
Thank you so much for this tremendous work, sir. One quick question.
to me, they're obvious, and even when we made it in '92, I think I try as a filmmaker to live in the world that these people are in. Now, if you do anything in the Civil War, what I learned is Civil War history is a full contact sport. You're touching a third rail, because here we are 150 years later. One of the major issues in our lives as American citizens is race. It's identity. Who are we as a people? And as we know, the Civil War decided a couple of big things. The country was reunified after being torn apart, and it has stayed together as a political, cultural unity since then. 2, the enslaved people were liberated finally after centuries. And then we know that was decided by the end of the war, by Appomattox, and by the 13th Amendment. And the 13th Amendment, that story, to my mind, brilliantly cinematically achieved by Steven Spielberg in his movie Lincoln. Very difficult subject. I can't think of another filmmaker in the world who could go into a studio and say, I want to make a movie about the ratification of the 13th Amendment, and not have their eyes glaze over. But he did it. Now, okay, those were huge things that generation did. Now, I'm working on a project now, who knows if it'll ever be made, about reconciliation. Because what happened immediately when the war ended? Within days of Appomattox, Lincoln was assassinated. Well, Lincoln was for reconciliation. You listen to the second inaugural, it's pretty clear. And if you study the politics, it's pretty clear. We got to heal the nation. It's not about retribution. It's not about trying people for treason. We got to bring the Confederate States back into the American polity. And we got to bring the African Americans, the enslaved people called at the time, into citizenship. We can't do this if we're hanging people. And one of the people who argued for that was, in fact, Frederick Douglass. So the priority now is to get all these people who were enslaved transitioned into a life where they can make a living, where they can have a job, where they can feed their families. That should be our focus, not punishment, not retribution. But when Lincoln was assassinated, that made it a lot harder. Because now the people who blood vengeance was up. Jefferson Davis was arrested. He was incarcerated for more than 2 years. He was charged for 3 counts. All of them would have ended in the death penalty. And the film I'm working on is how the people behind the scenes said, we can't go down this road. I'm talking about abolitionists, unionists like Horace Greeley, like Vanderbilt, who said we got to heal the nation. So when you see this story, those of us who have studied the Civil War, this annihilation, this destructiveness, where people say, you know, we're not talking anymore. We're shooting you. And how long, and had a generation that lived through it and endured the suffering, no family escaped. No family escaped. It was on a level of what Europe experienced in World War II. There was nowhere to hide. And my movie Copperhead is about a family way north of the fighting that was devastated because the community was divided. So those of us who studied the Civil War and how that generation that followed put it back, not perfectly, a lot of problems, as we know, Reconstruction, not pretty, and lingering problems, Jim Crow, et cetera, et cetera. But the attempt was made. We got to patch it up. So when I hear today, to answer your question, anybody from any political side saying, let's tear it all down, I would say these people are massively ignorant of American history. They don't know what they're talking about. Tear it all down? Anarchy? Shooting our neighbors? Or when I hear people talking about the enemy within, this is right out of Nazi Germany. No, the more you study American history, the more you know we have to treat each other with respect, with compassion, with understanding. That's the only route to take. but we're surrounded by people who, at the extremes, who are preaching another story. And unfortunately, they're getting an audience.
Got time for one more question, anybody? Anybody?
Yeah, one question.
Yes?
Tell us about the scene with Martin Sheen and the troops surrounding him.
You want to tell that story? The spontaneous scene?
It's not getting a scene.
Yeah, that was really amazing. Of course, we're in an environment in which, with the reenactors, the respect for the history is tremendous. They have a tremendous knowledge and a very strong emotional bond with what they're doing. And it showed really when Marty Sheen came on the set for the first time on a horse, right? He was dressed up and made up and he came on the horse. And we were set up to do a scene. I forgot what the scene was that we were actually going to shoot, but we had some cameras set up and we were ready to roll. And he came up on the horse and everybody just turned around. Like we were probably about the day with 1,500 reenactors. And they surrounded him and they were just, in awe of him. And what did they say?
They were saying, Lee.
Yeah. And we shot the scene because, well, why not? I mean, and it is in the movie as a very spontaneous scene.
Yeah, we saw what was happening. I'm a child of the 60s, so if you lived through the 60s, with a thing called happenings. There was a happening. So all these people, they weren't responding to Marty Sheen, the actor, the celebrity, the Hollywood guy. It was Robert E. Lee. He wasn't scheduled to shoot that day. The only reason he came out was because I sent the message back. It was so hot. It was suffering. We were running out with the Gatorade. Ask Marty if he'll come out and just suit up to move their morale. And the message came back, yes. We're like 2.5 hours in makeup. Marty Sheen, in case you don't know it, is a great guy. He comes out and he rides out on Traveler, and they saw Lee. It was Lee. And this was going on. There was like 1,500 guys, and I said, "Take roll." We didn't have sticks. It was not a scene. So we rolled. This is film days, not digital. So after I see Case going, "Out film." We didn't even get tail sticks. Nothing. It ran out. And so then I'm telling the ADs, cut. We couldn't calm these people down. Cut, over, end, stop. And then we thought, wait a minute, this is like amazing. Because they acted like Confederate soldiers with Robert E. Lee. Like you had 1,500 SAG members. So I said, new scene, new number, whatever we were doing for the rest of the afternoon, move it. We're doing this scene. And then we went back, we restaged the head to this camera with more dolly track. And we spent a couple, 2 hours redoing what we saw.
I think part of the scene, if not a lot of it, is that first spontaneous moment that we shot as a documentary.
Yeah.
And it was so strong.
Yeah. That's the heart of it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We dressed it up.
Yeah, that's the heart.
Interesting.
And a totally spontaneous, unscripted scene that, after 32 years, I can say is one of the favorite scenes of the fans of the movie.
Ron, Case, thank you very much for coming today. Appreciate it. Thank you for coming.